These are the lecture notes for Unit 5 on cell membranes. Let me get the slideshow going. Okay, so the cell membrane is also called the plasma membrane. So depending on what your instructor, what your teacher called it when when you learned biology in middle school and high school, you might recognize it as plasma membrane. It's the same thing. And you may be wondering why we have an entire chapter on the plasma membrane. And that is because it's not just about the structure of the plasma membrane, but it is also about transport across the plasma membrane, which is very, very important. Um, there are so many examples of chemicals that need to be transported into and out of our cells across that plasma membrane. So the structure of the plasma membrane is called the fluid mosaic model. And that is because the fluid part is because the main component of the plasma membrane is a double layer or bilayer of phospholipids. And phospholipids have a hydrophobic end and a hydrophilic end. The hydrophobic fatty acid tails face toward each other, and then the hydrophilic heads face away from each other. So one head faces the um, outside of the cell, and one head faces inside of the cell. We'll look at the fluid mosaic model in just a minute, but the fluid part just means that it's more of a fluid. It's not like all the molecules that compose the plasma membrane are not just stuck in one place. Um, there is a fluid nature to it where the molecules can kind of move past each other and move around a little bit. So the plasma membrane, it says, is studded with proteins. And what that means is that there are proteins within that phospholipid bilayer. Some of the proteins extend all the way through the phospholipid bilayer, and some of the proteins do not. But some of these proteins that are found within the phospholipid bilayer they function in, I'm sorry, they function in transporting substances across the plasma membrane, either into the cell or out of. The outside of the plasma membrane has carbohydrate chains attached. Uh, some of these carbohydrate chains are attached to the proteins, some are attached to the phospholipids, but their main function is to identify the cell to other cells. All right, and again, the fluid mosaic model, the fluid nature is due to the fatty acid tails and the presence of cholesterol. So basically, the fatty acid tails, let me find one, here we go. If you remember learning in chapter 3 about saturated fats versus unsaturated. So the more kinks or double carbon-carbon bonds that you have, the more unsaturated fatty acid tails that you have, the more fluid the plasma membrane is going to be, because unsaturated fats are typically oils, whereas saturated fats are typically solids at room temperature. So the more of these unsaturated fatty acids that you have, the more fluid your plasma membrane will be. And cholesterol is real important for regulating the fluid nature of the membrane in animal cells, particularly animals that live in regions where the temperature is near 0 or below 0 degrees Celsius, freezing or below freezing. Because what the cholesterol does is it acts as an antifreeze in very cold climates. because it won't freeze up in the cold. But now, if the animal lives in a warm climate, the cholesterol will not be as liquidy. It will be more of a solid influence on the plasma membrane. So cholesterol just kind of helps regulate that fluid nature of the membrane. We don't want our plasma membranes of our cells to be so fluid, that they're like a liquid and they won't hold our cells together. They won't hold together. But we don't want them to be solid either, because we need for the molecules in the membrane to be able to move around a little bit. The word mosaic is used because of the proteins and other chemicals that are scattered throughout the membrane. And they are not firmly fixed in place. They can move around among the phospholipids. So what you're looking at here is just one image, but say this channel protein or protein channel. Um, this is a protein that allows molecules such as ions to move through the plasma membrane, either into or out of the cell. And so it's one of those proteins that goes all the way through the membrane. It spans the entire membrane. Um, it's called an integral protein. Integral whenever it goes all the way through the plasma membrane. You can see all the little phospholipids. One phospholipid it's got a red hydrophilic head and then two yellow hydrophobic tails. Um, but these proteins can move. If you sort of imagine the phospholipids as marbles and the proteins as larger marbles, how they can kind of move through it and past each other. You're not going to have a protein jump from here to here, but it can slip in and out of those phospholipids. So that is what is meant by fluid. I do want to point out the glycolipids are when a carbohydrate chain is attached to a phospholipid. So glyco means carbohydrate chain, or refers to a chain of carbohydrates. And typically the carbohydrate is glucose, so it's typically a chain of glucose molecules. And if it's a glycoprotein, it just means that that carbohydrate chain is attached to one of the proteins, one of the membrane proteins. Um, and the main function of these glycoproteins and glycolipids is identifying the cell to other cells. Um, it can, you know, the best way I know to explain it is you've probably heard when someone needs an organ or a tissue transplant, they have to find a donor who matches their tissue or their organ. They have to have a match. A lot of times the donor will come from that person's family because you you really have to be very closely matched. Um, and what they're matching are these glycoproteins and glycolipids. Um, they're different in the cells of different individuals. So that's one thing. And then you can see the cholesterol. Cholesterol is a four-ring structure, and you can see the cholesterol scattered throughout the phospholipid bilayer. A phospholipid contains a phosphate head, which is hydrophilic, meaning water loving. That means it is soluble in water. And it also contains the molecule glycerol. And then the hydrophobic tails are the fatty acids, which are insoluble in water. And that is the reason that we see the phospholipids line up the way they do. If we were to toss a bunch of phospholipids into a container of water, they would naturally do this. They would naturally line up and their tails face toward each other so that they're not in contact with the fluid inside the cell or outside the cell. So The phospholipid bilayer is an arrangement of phospholipids just like they would arrange themselves without any help. So that this is just how they naturally arrange themselves when they are surrounded by water. And if you think about it, almost all of our cells in our body are surrounded by water. The only ones that aren't are the ones that are on the very outside that compose our skin. The plasma membrane is selectively permeable. What that means is it allows some substances to pass across the membrane, but prevents others from passing across the membrane. Um, Lipid-soluble material that has a low molecular weight, or what we could say is small nonpolar molecules, because lipids are nonpolar covalent molecules. Examples would be fat-soluble vitamins, vitamin A, vitamin K, I know those are fat-soluble, or steroid hormones. Now, hormones that are proteins would not be allowed to just cross through the phospholipid bilayer. But as long as they're small and nonpolar lipid molecules, or like oxygen and carbon dioxide gas, can pass directly through the phospholipid bilayer during respiration. Oxygen moves into the cell and carbon dioxide moves out. And both of these molecules are small and nonpolar. But substances that can't pass through, that must pass through a protein, they can't pass directly through the lipid bilayer, are ions, all charged ions. And you see the words here, but I'll show you the symbols in case you don't know. Sodium is Na with a positive charge. Potassium is K plus. Calcium has a +2 charge, and then chloride ions, which have a negative charge. And also simple sugars and amino acids, which are polar molecules, which means that they are soluble in water but not in lipids. So any molecules that are soluble in water but not lipids, and any charged ions, which that's redundant because ion is a charged atom. But any ions and any polar molecules are going to have to go through a protein channel. So we're going to talk about transport across the plasma membrane, and there are two main types of transport. Passive transport does not require energy. Just like if you are being passive, if you are behaving passively, you're not using any energy. If you're passive in your classes, you don't really participate. But if you're active, you actively participate, you ask correct questions, raise your hand, make comments, and that kind of thing. So passive does not require the cell to exert any energy. It doesn't require energy. And the direction that the substances move, they move from their high concentration to their low concentration. And when you have a difference in concentration in one area versus another, we call that difference in concentration a concentration gradient. One example of passive transport is diffusion. And diffusion, when it occurs across the plasma membrane, it is simply, it's not telling you what these molecules are, but whatever they are lipid soluble because they are moving directly through the phospholipid bilayer. But what's going to happen is their concentration is high outside the cell and it's low inside the cell. So you're going to see these molecules begin to move into the cell until they're about equal in concentration on both sides of the plasma membrane. So that is diffusion across the plasma membrane. From high to low, no energy is required.